This is Dennis Ramundi. I'm here with my co-host, Phil Goldberg, author of American Veda, our podcast, Spirit Matters, found at spiritmatterstalk.com. Our guest today, Dr. Robert Keith Wallace. He is the gentleman who conducted the pioneering research on meditation, specifically transcendental meditation, back in the early 70s. He was published in Science, the American Journal of Physiology, and Scientific American in the early stage, and published in many more journals since then. He is the founding president of Maharishi International University, now called Maharishi University of Management. He is still on the board there. And his latest book that he has written with Dr. Travis, both of them being neurophysiologists, is Dharma Parenting, and we want to talk about that today. And I should say that Keith is a friend of mine from way, way back, as he is also a friend of Phil's. And I was also involved with him in the very early days of Maharishi International University. And it's a pleasure to have you come on the show, Keith.
Thank you guys very much. It's a pleasure to be on the show.
Good. In the interest of full disclosure, all three of us were involved in those early days. And here we are all these years later. And back in those days, Keith, you had at least one child and then another and so forth. And now, all these years later, you're doing a book on parenting, Dharma parenting. Maybe give us a sense of what inspired the book, how it came to be, what was the motivation for writing it.
Good question. Yeah, I have 4 children and 6 grandchildren, and my own kids asked me, what the heck are you writing a book on parenting for? So, yes, that is a good question. And, it's interesting. I'm not exactly sure what was the absolute beginning moment, but it just came to me at one point when I was with a group of people that this was something very valuable that needed to get out there. Somebody was asking what was the best advice I could give someone, and the best advice I could give someone was to get a good teacher. And then I thought about it, and I was addressing actually a number of moms, and I thought, well, you really are the best teacher. As a parent, you're the one that really starts your child. You're the one that really forms all their basic neural circuits, which are, no matter what we do in life, those ones that are formed early in childhood are still the ones that have an enormous effect on our behavior and our habits, our emotions, everything we do. So I talked to Fred, and he had written some very nice stuff on child development, and we just sort of thought, hey, this would be a good idea to try to help parents. We both had that experience that when you become a parent, there's no manual out there. There's no book. You're kind of struggling for information, and particularly information that deals with behavioral characteristics. There are a lot of books on how to put the diapers on and so forth, but how to really understand what's important as a parent and what to realize the role you have. At least we didn't have anything. There's no college course on it, which is kind of insane when you think that the most important thing for most people they'll do when they get out of college is becoming a parent. You can be a billionaire, you can write books, you can do all kinds of things, but in the end, it's your children who you care about the most. They're the ones that really stretch your heart, and they're the ones who you've really brought into this world and are really responsible for. The contract never ends. And so, we got started on it, and we put down some ideas, and we decided to really incorporate all that we had learned, particularly from Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. And transcendental meditation is a big part of the book. Ayurveda is a big part of the book, understanding the different brain-body natures. We call them brain-body natures.
Mm-hmm.
They're generally called body types. And, we tried to make the book extremely practical. I must say it's our wives who really did the best writing in the book. And the stories and the kind of tools that we develop are really a result of all four of us working together and really going back and thinking about all the things that we had done, all the things that we had learned. And of course, we made mistakes ourselves. It's not like, we didn't understand a lot of things when we were first parents. So huge amount of learning that goes on. But we tried to put all this knowledge down in the light of what we had learned from Maharishi and put it in a book for, future generations, so that people would have a more profound understanding. And frankly, there's probably more research now than there's ever been. You can see research on things like gene expression, on brain circuits that have to do with stress. I mean, it's unbelievable how much research has been done on parenting. So it's an amazing area with a lot of wonderful facets to it. And we really enjoyed doing it. We spent about 3 years writing it. And now it's out, and it's quite fun.
Right. Keith, let me ask. First of all, I want to let our listeners also know, I know all four of your kids, and I had 3 of them when I was a school principal. And they're really, and I'm not just saying this because you're a guest on the show, they're really fabulous, fabulous kids. They're, middle, they're 30s and even 40 now. And so whatever you did, worked out really well with them because they're very different from one another, but really tremendous. And also, I have noticed, especially I'm still in touch with your boys, that they themselves are very committed, very devoted parents. So I think it must be structured into their genes. But the book is called Dharma Parenting. The word Dharma, I think I understand what it means. Probably different people have different thoughts or understandings about what that word means. Some people might not know it all. Define that, and then if you could elaborate a little bit, because you get into this in the book, how much of parenting skill is kind of structured into the person's physiology already, and how much is learned? It's like being an athlete. Some people are naturally good at it. Some people need a lot more training. But if you could talk about Dharma and also that.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, Dharma is an interesting word. It's sort of like yoga and meditation and karma. Those words nobody knew anything about, 20 years ago or so, and now they're used in commercials, So these words are words that come from the East that have really been absorbed in the West in interesting ways. Dharma is a word that has many different meanings to it, but the meaning that we chose was a meaning that's, it's both from India, from China, from Japan, from the whole East, really. It's this idea that it's your path in life. Your Dharma is your path, and for the child, that's, very important. What's their path in life, and how can we help them as parents make that path happy, healthy, successful? What can we do to ensure that our child finds that path and that the journey is a very meaningful, spiritual, and successful one? And so that's, we really fell in love with this word just because of its profundity. We realized that it's a bit of an obstacle because here you've got a name that nobody knows about. The title of your book, it's not the absolute catchiest title out there, but I would say it's very oriented toward, yoga moms who are already interested in yoga and meditation, and so this is something that takes them a step further. And it's true that different people have innate abilities as parents, but again, usually it kind of works out that a lot of your parenting skills come from what you learned as a child. If your parents provided certain things for you, or if your teachers provided certain things for you, then you learn those, and that's kind of the way the knowledge has been passed down, not very systematically and a little by chance. We kind of identify right in the beginning. We have this acronym, which is Dharma, because we just chose the letters as our 6 tools. So D stands for discover your own brain body type and that of your child. And for anybody listening, you can immediately go to the quiz on dharmaparenting.com. That's our website, DHARMA parenting.com. And there's a quiz you can take for yourself and you can take for your child, or your child can take it themselves. And that quiz gives you a 4-page PDF report which tells you all about your particular nature and what are the strengths and weaknesses, what do you need to do to stay in balance. And that's kind of the first recommendation we make, because you can be one type, like there's 3 basic types, Vata, Pitta, and Kapha, and we use the Ayurvedic words here to honor the tradition. But say you're one type, say you're a Pitta type, a Pitta dad, a Pitta mom, and that means you're very goal-oriented, very competitive, organized, lots of energy. And say you have maybe a Vata girl and a Kapha boy. And, nobody's always pure. They tend to be mixtures of all these, but let's just take this as an example. So you're all ready to go out for sports, and you got this lovely little Vata girl who's like a butterfly, and she's, you're the Pitta, and she's the Vata, and she's very creative. She loves music, she loves to read, she loves to dance, very movement-oriented, amazing learner, very imaginative. And if you start to impose your Pitta nature, like, oh, come on, let's go out, go in these competitive sports, here are the goals, we want to get these goals done today and everything, you're going to have, what we call brain-body types colliding. It's just not going to work. And likewise, if you have your little Kapha boy who's a little slower, he likes to take more time, getting dressed in the morning, eating breakfast, extremely good-natured, very friendly, but, he doesn't always like change. So you get on him and you've got your goals and your competitive sports and whatever, and he just takes a little longer to do things. And so if you don't factor these things in, then it's hard to be a good parent, because a lot of parents try to impose themselves on the children, which, the expectations of the parents on the children is, sort of a classic psychological problem that people have. And what we don't realize is that the very acts we do just change the brain. The brain is constantly being changed by experience. So a child that's from 0 to 3 years old has 24 million connections between their neurons every minute. I mean, it's just unbelievable what's going on in their brain. And some of these are very genetically organized, so they're to enable us to see better, to feel, to do basic functions. But also many of these connections are later going to form the very basis of our behavior. So if one parent, who has a particular nature, tries to impose that on their child, that really doesn't allow the child's own individuality to unfold, and doesn't allow the strengths of the child to unfold. And the key concept here is balance. The Pitta parent can be very good, can be very organized, keep everything together, but if the Pitta parent misses a meal or is out in the sun and it's too hot, they can get irritable and angry. And that's not going to help. We all know that, kind of anger and fatigue are not good for child rearing.
Right.
Latest research.
Yeah, if I could let Phil go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to add, Keith, it sounds like the book does a great job in recognizing the individuality of the children and the importance to the parents of being able to discern their children's nature, and therefore what would be best to bring out that development. In Ayurvedic terms, some people listening to the show will be familiar with Ayurveda and the three doshas you just described. Is the questionnaire enough for a person to have a good sense of their type and their condition or situation or constellation of qualities at any given moment, in the absence of a proper diagnosis with an Ayurvedic Vaidya or doctor and a pulse diagnosis and that sort of thing? You know what I'm saying?
Sure. Kind of yeah, it's always better to have like a real Vaidya do a pulse diagnosis. That would be ideal. But of course, they aren't available. So these questionnaires have been used. We've sort of tested them, and they seem to be quite reliable. They're interesting because this particular questionnaire has questions in 3 separate areas of life, and then it gives you the percentage of Vata, Pitta, and Kapha in each area. So even though you may say, oh, you're a Vata Pitta, it may turn out that in your area of emotions, you have a lot more Pitta than Vata. And in your area of your physical, you could even have more Kapha. So it's very, it's a little more precise than kind of an overall categorization. I mean, we're always worried about using the word type because typing, people are afraid. You're typing me a certain type, that means I'm limited. And we try our best not to do that, and we try to caution everyone that everyone can unfold to their full potential. We're not trying to type or limit people into a category. We're not trying to excuse bad behavior because it's this type. We're just trying to give parents an insight into how they can keep everybody balanced. And there's just simple recommendations, like for a Vata kid, being on a routine is huge, keeping them grounded. For a Pitta person, eating on time and not getting overheated, huge. And for Kapha, really actually getting people off a routine, getting them outside, doing more exercise, really important. So we're not going to the highest level of Ayurveda. We're just kind of taking the simplest aspects. We're not really recommending any herbal preparations. We have a section in the back of the book where we talk about diet, but it's much more focused on behavior and how you can, just through simple behavioral techniques, have a much deeper appreciation of the differences and how you can keep each person in balance.
Right, Keith, I have a question along those lines. Let's say somebody gets your book, Dharma Parenting. They become aware, okay, I have a kid that's very Kapha, or I have a kid that's very Vata, and they make whatever behavioral adjustments to accommodate a better learning and developmental program for that child. But when they go to school, in almost any school, what's really rewarded is Pitta types, people that are very organized, very energetic. Probably a lot of us are like that. That's why we sort of spend more time in school than others. How does so you are a parent, you're doing it, but the school isn't. How do you coordinate that? What do you suggest they do? And if you had charge of a school, what would you do to make sure that those things were dealt with?
Yeah, well, one of the tools in the book, the third one, is attention. And we make this big point that the quality and kind of attention you give the kid shapes their brain. And, we have attention and appreciation. So a lot of kids suffer from the fact that they don't get appreciation for who they are. And like you say, the schools very much reward the Pitta type. And so you have to, as a parent, you can, help this. So if you have a kid that's more Kapha and they're a little slower learner, and they're being sort of penalized by all the other kids who are quicker learners, then, you pretty much have to figure out how to help the kid at night yourself, or get a tutor, or do things that will accommodate, because it's not going to happen at school. I mean, a really, really good teacher gets this. And she knows she has fast learners, slow learners, and medium learners. And a really good teacher actually manages to adjust the lessons so that kids don't get penalized. But unfortunately, there are a lot of teachers who don't take the time to do that. So as a parent, you have to supplement your kid by giving them the extra time to learn. Or if it's a VADA kid and they're bored at school, you got to give them books to read, give them opportunities to express their creativity. Maybe they take art lessons outside of school or music lessons. Parenting, I mean, you have such huge control over the upbringing of these kids that, of course school takes up a huge amount of time. Of course there's massive social interaction. But you are the coach afterwards. They come home. They need to be reassured. They need to be debriefed. They need a lot of help at that point, just to be able to manage all the different things they're going through, particularly at the different ages, like when they become teenagers. And that's pretty much, supreme complications are arising. And if there are parents who keep the channels of communication open, the kid gets enormous benefit. They can actually, freely talk to their parents about the kind of difficulties that everybody's going through. But instead of getting advice from another kid, which is, we know what that does, they get advice from, somebody who has some wisdom and compassion and love, and they have trust, and suddenly, they've got their own coach, their own counselor that's kind of steering them through what are going to be, for sure, difficult social situations, because it's just part of life, part of growing up.
And Keith, and you alluded to this already. I wanted to ask about section 2 of your book, which is divided into 4 age groups, and it looks like there's a kind of sense of the developmental stages of a person's life from early childhood through young adulthood. How does the approach that you're recommending and the use of Ayurveda and understanding of Dharma change as the child progresses through different ages?
Well, we try to make a big point on that. We have these 6 tools, but then how they're applied is quite different at different ages, and it's because the brain's changing. You got all this enormous activity when they're really young, and then it's some really amazing things happen. When the kid gets 4, 6, 7, 8, like that, suddenly they become far more verbal. They're interested in rules. They like boundaries. They like knowing everything. And, one thing that's fascinating is their brain at that point becomes thicker. The cortex becomes thicker than at any other time in their life. And then a bizarre thing happens when they become teenagers. Suddenly you have something called neural pruning, where actually the number of connections in the brain gets cut down. It's like pruning a plant. They actually try to strengthen the growth of a plant, by pruning off certain branches. And now it's kind of a use it or lose it. What connections that are particularly important, those stay, and the ones that aren't so important go away. So, I mean, kids, they go to bed at night and they wake up in the morning, they got a different brain. I mean, this is like a lot of things are going on.
Yeah.
And teenagers, they look like adults, but, we know they're not adults. And we also know that, neurophysiologically, they don't have all the connections to the frontal areas of the brain. So why we expect them to make correct judgments is crazy. They don't have the tools there to do it in their brain.
But they think they do.
They think they do, yeah, they sure do. And then, and young kids, when a kid is bouncing on a couch and you scream at them, stop jumping, they might hear jump and they jump more. They just don't have the same neurophysiological tools. We impose our judgments, our brain operations on them, and it's not true. There's a lot of controversy. Should you pick up a crying child? Are you spoiling the child? And it turns out all the studies, really show that, yeah, you should pick them up. they really are crying for a real reason, and most of the time they're not being fussy. Something's actually going on wrong. Is it good to be an authoritative parent? No. It's terrible. I mean, it's ultimately parents that punish their kids physically and are tough and everything. Those are the kids that drink the most, take the most drugs, and get into the most trouble when they become teenagers. Is it good to be a permissive parent? Let them do what they want? Absolutely not. Those kids also get into drugs and alcohol and all kinds of problems. It's kind of like common sense. I mean, you've got to give them boundaries. They need boundaries, but it's got to be done with love and appreciation. The quality of the attention is very, very important. And let's face it, if you're a single mom, how much time do you actually have to interact with your kid?
Yeah.
So, we're in a very strange world where we're not even using all the tools we have just because of the restrictions of our lives, the situations. So what little time we have, we really, really needs to be quality. And parents really have to understand that what they do, the quality of their attention, has an enormous effect on how a kid will behave for the rest of their life.
Great. Keith, when you wrote your book, Dharma Parenting, and you did your research, would you say that there are certain cultures in the world that are following what you're recommending in the book more than other cultures, or is it a mishmash where some people in North America do it, some people in Asia do it, some people don't, or are there cultures in the world that, say in Japan or wherever, where you think they're more in line with what you're recommending in the book?
I think it's a huge mishmash right now.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think anybody does all those things. I mean,
Right.
I think, there's a very interesting book about an American mom that goes to France. She finds out that the child care system there, they get, gourmet food. The people get huge salaries. It's like, the greatest child care system in the world. And then, you go to Japan or something and you see, or you go to India and you see how they bring up the children. But we've all been so dramatically influenced by technology and the world that it's rare that anybody is, lives maybe in certain countries, certain places where you really have the traditional family structure and where people, the grandparents are waking up early to take care of the kids. The world has changed so much that many of these great traditions that kept families together are lost, and some of the terrible traditions, that caused grief among all kinds of children are gone. So
Right.
It's good and bad.
Yeah, Phil, I wanted to ask one follow-up question, one final question from me, and that is, and it touches upon what you were just saying. Anywhere I've been, I just came back from Europe, and in Europe, it's just like the United States. Everywhere I go, every time I see a kid, they're looking at a phone that's in their hand. And I mean, it's unbelievable. I mean, I do it
I
myself,
know.
but they're following whatever they're following, Pokemon, or they're looking. They don't look at each
Yeah,
other. And as they're teenagers, it
I
completely
know.
takes over. How would the principles in your book address that?
Yeah, we do talk about that, and we've done an online course at MUM where we go into some of these topics more deeply. But electronics, the most horrific thing in the world is a cute little kid and they're on a phone and playing, and then the parent quietly comes along and says, "Okay, now it's time to change," and the kid just goes screaming mad because they're taking away
the kid says to the parents, "Text me that, and I'll do it later."
Yeah. So I mean, at least Pokemon they get up, So that's but of course they could run into a car, or something like that. I mean, it's utterly crazy. There are these circuits in the brain, the dopamine circuits, which most people talk about in terms of addictions. If somebody's an addict on something, they have this one neurochemical that they really need all the time. And the brain needs higher and higher levels, so you get these very intense addictions. And I would say, electronic games and video and all this stuff is like that. But, when we were kids, we had television. You know,
Right.
I think of one of our good friends, John Smilik. He told me, he grew up in front of the television, did all his homework in front of the television. He went to
He only has 3 channels.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, there you go. So I mean, it's a strange world, and kids do manage. They do survive. There's some bizarre studies that show that games actually improve some aspect of the brain.
Right.
But, in the end, I think what we recommend in the book is that you got to create boundaries. You actually have to have, very specific numbers of hours they can play these games. For a VADA kid especially, they got to stop, before the night gets on because they need time to come down from one of these games. And, we make pretty strong recommendations, just kind of common sense, on creating boundaries and not using the games as a babysitter, really.
Right.
Keith, one of the chapters that stood out for me as I was reading this, at just even looking at the table of contents, is managing meltdowns. I'm sure every parent would, has had to deal with this. I don't have kids, but I'm an uncle. There are people listening who have maybe wished they had this book when they were raising kids, but now they have grandchildren or nieces and nephews. What advice could you give, briefly in the time we have left, for dealing with meltdowns?
This is one of the tools. Again, we have D is for discovering your brain body type. H is to heal yourself, TM and all the very good things you can do. A is for attention. R is for routines. And now we've got to M, which is manage meltdowns, which, believe it or not, we have some more letters. We have 6 C's for this one. The first 3 are pretty straightforward. You got to check in with yourself. You got to figure out, did you eat and did the kid eat? Just some basics to figure out what's causing it. First thing you got to do is comfort the kid, because you can change their brain state just with a hug, So the very, very first thing is comforting. And then you do have to change the brain state. And you can't reason with a kid in a meltdown. There's just, screaming at him, yelling at him, telling them, this is not the time. It's just useless. So you do have to recognize they're in a purely emotional state. And so whatever it takes, whether it's singing to them, taking them outside, whether it's, quiet time, whether it's giving them some food, whatever you can do to change the brain state, and we provide lots of different alternatives for different types, you've got to do. And then once you've done that, then you can address the more kind of reasonable issues. You can give the kid a choice. Once they're able to kind of think more clearly, then they can choose. Do you want to keep crying and we'll leave the restaurant, or do you want to stay here and finish your meal? And if they can choose, that's great, because then they can decide, let's stay, I'm okay, And then if these things go on, you've got to have consequences. And in our R for routines, one of the things we strongly suggest are family meetings where you actually talk about these consequences ahead of time, and they participate. So especially for teenagers, let's say it's a curfew issue, they understand, hey, you come back at this time, that's great. You can keep that curfew. If you break the trust, if you break the curfew, what would you say would be a consequence? Well, Dad, I think, maybe then I had to come back a half an hour early for 3 weeks or something. So they participated in the consequences. So when they come up, it's not like you're springing anything on them. They know ahead of time. They know what's going to happen. And finally, the last C is for coaching. In the end, you are the coach. You're the one that has to be there for them in the hard moments, in the, great elation and the great traumas. You have to be there, and you have to act as a coach more than anything. You have to be by their side and get them through the difficult moments.
Phil, any final questions that you have?
Yeah, I would like, in the one question or a few minutes we have remaining, I would like to switch gears for a minute and take advantage of Keith's presence. Keith, you and Fred Travis, your co-author, you've both been at the enterprise of scientific research for many years now, for decades. And you're in a position where you've been at the sort of intersection of science and spirituality, and the intersection of brain research and the study of consciousness. I'd be very curious to get your perspective on how things have changed in science over the few decades, and especially with regard to the understanding of consciousness. I always find it frustrating when I hear these very sophisticated brain researchers on television operating under the assumption that consciousness is just a result of brain activity. And I'm really curious to know how you see things at the moment and how it's changed.
I think it's still a world that's caught up in a lot of ignorance. We went, from when I was a young scientist to extreme ignorance, where kind of behavioralism was the norm, and people were, they wouldn't even talk about consciousness.
Right.
To now where people are talking about it, they're debating it. It's an open debate in neuroscience. They actually, really deal with what are the neural circuits in different states of consciousness. But there's still the dilemma that we all face, and that is that how do you consider consciousness as separate from the human body? And that, I don't think science has gotten very far. It's just it gets into another issue, more metaphysical issue about whether consciousness is something which can exist by itself, independent of the physical body. And, nobody has seen any proof, even the near-death experiences, whatever people come up with, it's still a tough one to convince anybody. It walks into the area of religion and spirituality. And so you can't really blame scientists. They're sort of caught in a world where they at least are talking about consciousness, higher states of consciousness. But what's more interesting than anything? It's not so much the scientists, but it's what Maharishi did. He took enlightenment, which had never been talked about in terms of science, and he described it in terms of the brain for the first time. So he reversed the whole thing, and he actually said enlightenment was, neurophysiological refinement. Nobody in the spiritual world had ever done that. So it's kind of a meeting between two very divergent points of view, and I would say that both of them are moving closer. Maharishi really initiated the kind of scientific exploration into consciousness and scientific understanding of enlightenment. And science, still, it's hard for them, but at least they're far more open, far more interested, and at least talking about it.
Very good.
Fabulous. Well, Keith, thank you so much for taking the time to come on. And a couple of things. One is we look forward to having you back on, because I can think of at least a dozen other areas I'd like to discuss with you. And also,
I think we should have his children on.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, that's true.
Good idea.
The book Dharma Parenting by Robert Keith Wallace and Frederick Travis, available at Amazon.com. And what I'm going to do, and I'm serious, I have a family member who has a lovely young daughter who's having all kinds of trouble sleeping at night, and I'm going to get them the book, because I've talked to them about TM, I've talked to them about Ayurveda, and I think if they get the book and they actually read it, they will have a more complete understanding, and ultimately help the child in because it sounds like they're going through a real Vata period now. So we're recommending the book Dharma Parenting, and Keith, thank you so very much. Any final words, Keith or Phil, that you want to share?
No, I just want to thank Keith for being with us, and we'll look forward to seeing him again in person.
Thank you, guys. I think you do a great job, and it's wonderful that you uplift all our spirits and raise consciousness around the world. Thanks, guys.
Thank you so much. All the best.